In the middle of the city, down a quiet old street, there stood a little vintage shop. Its wooden door carried a small brass bell that rang softly every time someone entered, like time itself whispering a memory. That afternoon, the bell chimed again as Isabel pushed the door open. In her hands, she held a white box wrapped in an old satin ribbon. The shopkeeper looked up, trying to recognize her face, but she said nothing. There was a stillness in her expression, the kind that comes after a storm has already passed. She placed the box gently on the counter and spoke in a calm, tired voice, "I want to sell this." The shopkeeper's brows furrowed slightly. "Is this a wedding dress?" Isabel nodded, her eyes dry yet heavy, the kind of eyes that had already cried all their tears. She untied the ribbon, lifted the lid, and unfolded the fabric, snow white, soft as silence, touched by faint shadows of time. "I think someone else might need it now," she said quietly, as if trying to free herself from something invisible, something that still clung to her heart. There was a weight in her tone, not just sadness, but the exhaustion of someone who had carried her pain alone for too long. That dress had once been the symbol of joy. 2 years ago, Isabel had stood before her mirror in that very gown, smiling, glowing, full of dreams that made her eyes shimmer. Around her were laughter, music, friends, and him, Adam. The man who had promised to stay forever. But promises change with time, and life isn't a fairy tale. At first, everything seemed perfect. Then slowly, the distance began to grow, not in miles, but in moments. Until one day, Adam was gone, chasing another dream, another face, another version of love. Isabel was left behind in the same house where the walls still echoed with their laughter. Many nights, she sat on the edge of her bed, holding her wedding ring, replaying memories like broken records, asking herself over and over, what did I do wrong? But no answer ever came. Eventually, she took off that ring too. And today, she had come to let go of the last thing that still tied her to the past, that dress. When she folded the gown back into the box, the shopkeeper asked softly, "Are you sure you want to sell it? It's like selling your memories." Isabel smiled faintly, but it was the kind of smile that hides pain behind its edges. "I've held onto memories long enough," she whispered. "Maybe it's time to let them go." Her voice trembled slightly, like it was carrying 1,000 untold stories within it. She took the money, nodded politely, and walked out without looking back. Outside, the cold wind brushed against her face. The trees shivered, and the fallen leaves danced around her feet. She pulled her coat tighter, kept walking, each step heavy, yet strangely freeing, as if she was walking out of her own prison. When she reached home, she made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window. Rain began to fall, slow and steady, painting the glass with tiny rivers of light. She watched each drop slide down the pane, every one of them carrying a memory. For a moment she closed her eyes, and his face returned, his laugh, his voice, the promises they once made. Her heart ached, just a little, but this time she didn't cry. She simply breathed. "I'll be okay," she whispered to herself, almost convincing herself it was true. Deep down, she knew healing doesn't happen overnight. It's not a straight line. It's a journey, quiet, slow, and painfully beautiful. 2 days later, her phone rang. On the other end was an elderly woman, her voice warm and trembling, like the sound of an old violin. "Dear," she said gently, "is this the wedding dress you sold at the vintage shop?" Isabel hesitated. "Yes, are you thinking of buying it?" The woman chuckled softly. "Oh my dear. I already did. I just wanted to thank you." Isabel blinked, caught off guard. "Thank me?" she asked softly. The woman's voice broke slightly. "This dress is the exact size of my daughter. Her wedding was supposed to happen last year, but it didn't. Since then, she's been afraid to wear anything white. But when I saw your dress, I felt something, like it wasn't an ending, but a new beginning." Isabel's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes filled, not with sorrow this time, but something gentler, something that felt like light after years of darkness. For the first time, someone saw beauty in her pain. "Maybe," she whispered, voice shaking, "maybe the dress wanted to help someone else too." That evening, as the sun melted behind the city skyline, Isabel stood on her balcony. The sky burned orange and gold, the color of endings that somehow looked like beginnings. She looked up, her eyes tracing the clouds, and whispered softly, "Maybe life isn't over, maybe it's just changing." The wind brushed against her hair like an unseen hand comforting her. She took a deep breath, finished her tea, and made herself a quiet promise that from now on, she would live for herself. Not for promises, not for memories, not for someone who left. And perhaps in that very moment, without realizing it, the second chapter of her story had already begun. That night, sleep didn't come easily to Isabel. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain that had started again outside. The city lights shimmered faintly through the curtains, and every droplet against the glass sounded like a quiet heartbeat reminding her she was still alive. She turned on her side, clutching the edge of her blanket, her mind wandering back to the phone call, the old woman's trembling voice, her words full of kindness. It had been so long since someone had spoken to her that gently. For months, maybe even years, her heart had been a locked room filled with broken echoes. But tonight, something small, something warm, had stirred in her chest, the faintest spark of connection. She thought of the dress again. The way her fingers had brushed against its lace one last time, the way the light had touched it before she folded it away. For so long, she had believed that dress represented failure, a memory too painful to hold, a symbol of love that had turned into loss. But now, it was something else. Somewhere, that same dress was waiting to be worn again, not for her, but for someone who might find new meaning in it. And that realization, strange and quiet as it was, made her heart ache in a different way, softer, kinder, almost like healing. The next morning, Isabel woke to a message on her phone. It was from an unknown number, but the name at the bottom said Margaret. "My dear," the message began, "if you're free today, would you like to join me for tea? I'd love to show you something." Isabel stared at the screen for a long while. She hesitated, part of her afraid to open another door, another story. But then she remembered her promise from the night before, to start living again. So she took a deep breath, typed back yes, and pressed send. By afternoon, she found herself standing outside a small house on the edge of town, old, covered in ivy, the kind of place that seemed to belong to another time. When Margaret opened the door, she was everything Isabel had imagined: gentle eyes, silver hair tied neatly, a soft smile that felt like sunlight. "You must be Isabel," she said warmly. "Come in, dear." Inside, the house smelled of lavender and old books. Framed photographs lined the walls, faces of people long gone but never forgotten. On the table near the window stood a mannequin draped in white lace, her dress. Isabel froze. For a moment, she couldn't move. The sight of it stole her breath away. Margaret noticed and touched her arm gently. "It's beautiful, isn't it? I spent the morning ironing it, fixing the little tear near the hem. I wanted to make it perfect again." Isabel's voice trembled. "It looks even more alive than before." Margaret smiled. "That's because things carry love, my dear. Even when they're broken, they remember who touched them." They sat together near the window, drinking tea from delicate porcelain cups. Margaret spoke softly, as though every word had been waiting for this moment. "My daughter's name was Eleanor," she began. "She was supposed to marry last year, a wonderful man, kind and gentle. But just weeks before the wedding, he passed away in an accident." Her voice cracked slightly, but she continued, "Since then she's been lost. She doesn't smile anymore. She locked her wedding dress away and said she never wanted to see anything white again. But when I saw your dress in the shop window, I felt something. I thought, maybe this dress could remind her that love doesn't die, it just changes form." Isabel listened, her heart trembling inside her chest. The story felt like a mirror held up to her own pain: two women, two broken hearts, and one dress that had witnessed both love and loss. "Where is she now?" Isabel asked quietly. Margaret pointed to the garden. Through the open window, Isabel saw a young woman sitting beneath a tree, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze distant. Her hair was dark like rain clouds, her face pale, and her eyes hollow in a way Isabel recognized instantly. "Would you like to meet her?" Margaret asked. Isabel hesitated but nodded. They stepped outside together, the air heavy with the scent of roses and wet soil. The young woman looked up as they approached. For a moment, their eyes met, and something silent passed between them, something deeper than words. Margaret smiled softly. "Eleanor, this is Isabel, the woman who once owned your new dress." Eleanor blinked, surprised. "You're the one." Isabel nodded gently. "Yes. I wanted it to belong to someone who still believes in beginnings. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint sound of chimes from the porch. Finally, Eleanor whispered, "When I first saw the dress, I didn't want to touch it. But then something about it felt alive. Like it had felt pain before. Like it understood." Isabel smiled faintly, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Maybe it does. Maybe it's been waiting for someone who knows what it's like to lose and still keep loving." Eleanor's eyes filled. She reached out, took Isabel's hand, and squeezed it. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "For giving it a second life. For giving me a reason to try again." Isabel couldn't hold back anymore. Her tears fell freely now, not of sorrow but of release. "Maybe we both needed it," she whispered. Margaret watched them quietly, her own eyes shimmering with quiet joy. "You see," she said softly, "sometimes the things we let go of don't really leave us. They just find their way to someone else who needs them." They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, about love, about grief, about how strange it is that broken hearts can still recognize one another. By the time Isabel left, the sky had turned a soft shade of gold. As she walked back down the garden path, she looked over her shoulder one last time. Inside the house, through the window, she saw Eleanor standing beside the mannequin, running her fingers gently over the lace of the gown. For the first time, she was smiling. When Isabel reached home that evening, the silence didn't feel heavy anymore. She took out her journal, the one she hadn't opened in months, and began to write. She wrote about Margaret, about Eleanor, about how pain connects souls in ways love never could. She wrote until her tears blurred the ink, until her heart felt lighter. When she finished, she whispered to herself, "Maybe that dress was never just mine. Maybe it was always meant to heal." And for the first time in years, Isabel fell asleep with a smile. Not because everything was okay, but because finally, it didn't have to be. The next morning, the light slipped through Isabel's curtains like a whisper. The world outside was quiet, bathed in soft gold, as though time itself had slowed down just to watch her breathe. She opened her eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel that familiar weight pressing against her chest. There was still sadness, yes, but it had softened, changed shape, become something she could hold without breaking. She lay still for a few moments, listening to the hum of life outside, the birds, the distant sound of a passing car, the rustle of leaves. Everything felt different now. Maybe because she was starting to feel different too. She sat by her window with a cup of tea, staring at the pale sky. On the table beside her lay her journal from last night, its pages still wrinkled from tears. She opened it again, tracing her own words with her fingers. Maybe it was always meant to heal. Those words stayed with her. They weren't just about the dress anymore. They were about her. About the way life sometimes takes everything from you, only to return it in another form, gentler, slower but truer. Her phone buzzed. A message from Margaret. "Eleanor wants to see you again, dear. Would you come by today? She hasn't stopped talking about you." Isabel smiled, a real smile this time, one that reached her eyes. Without overthinking, she grabbed her coat and left. When she arrived at Margaret's house, the sun had just begun to break through the clouds. Eleanor was waiting by the gate, her hair tied back, a shy smile on her lips. "I didn't think you'd actually come," she said softly. Isabel laughed lightly. "I promised I would." They walked through the garden together, where raindrops still clung to the petals. "I've been thinking," Eleanor said after a while. "I want to wear the dress. Not for a wedding, not yet. But just to remember what hope feels like." Isabel felt a lump form in her throat. "Then let's do it," she whispered. Margaret joined them soon after, carrying the dress carefully in her arms. The lace shimmered under the light, almost alive, as if it could sense what was about to happen. In the living room, Eleanor stood in front of the mirror while Isabel helped her fasten the buttons. Her hands trembled slightly, not from sadness, but from something else, reverence, maybe, or the fragile beauty of starting again. When Eleanor turned to face herself fully, her breath caught. "I thought this would hurt," she said softly. "But it doesn't. It feels peaceful." Isabel's reflection stood behind her, smiling faintly. "That's because it isn't about endings anymore," she said. "It's about remembering that we survived them." For a long time, none of them spoke. Margaret wiped her eyes quietly, watching the two women, one young, one older, both broken in different ways, and yet standing there like proof that love never really leaves, it only changes its shape. After a while, they went outside to take photographs. The garden glowed in the soft afternoon sun, the air sweet with the scent of lavender. Eleanor twirled slowly, her dress catching the light. Isabel felt her eyes sting again, but this time, the tears were warm. She looked at Margaret, who smiled knowingly. "She looks like hope again," Margaret said. Isabel nodded. "So do you," she whispered back. As the day faded, they sat together on the porch, watching the sky blush into shades of pink and gold. "You know," Eleanor said quietly, "when he died, I thought my story ended there. But now, maybe it was just a chapter." Isabel looked at her and smiled gently. "That's what I learned too. The story only ends when we stop reading it." Later that evening, as Isabel prepared to leave, Eleanor hugged her tightly, the kind of embrace that says more than words ever could. "I'll keep the dress safe," she whispered. Isabel smiled. "No," she said softly, "let it live. Let it be worn. Let it remind someone else that they can begin again too." As Isabel walked home, the wind brushed against her face, carrying the faint scent of roses. Her heart felt lighter, her steps steadier. When she reached her apartment, she placed her coat on the chair, sat by the window again, and looked out at the glowing city. Everything seemed quieter now, like the world itself was breathing with her. She picked up her journal once more. The page from last night was still open, her words staring back at her. She smiled and began to write again, not from pain this time, but from peace. "Healing isn't loud," she wrote. "It happens in the quiet moments, in the hands that help us button a dress, in the smiles we didn't expect, in the eyes that understand without asking. Maybe that's where love hides, not in what we keep, but in what we give away." She closed the journal, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time: stillness. The kind that doesn't scare you anymore. The kind that feels like home. That night she dreamed again, not of the past, not of loss but of light. She saw herself walking through a field of white flowers, sunlight spilling over everything. In the distance, she saw Eleanor, laughing, her dress glowing in the wind. And beside her, for just a fleeting second, Isabel saw him, the man she once loved, standing beneath a tree, smiling at her, not with sadness but with peace. It was as if he was saying, "You did it. You lived." When Isabel woke, the morning was bright, the air crisp with promise. She sat up slowly, whispering to herself, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, just to life, for letting her begin again. She got ready, tied her hair back, and looked at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who had packed that wedding dress away. She was softer now, but stronger too. Her eyes carried stories, not wounds. Her heart, though scarred, beat with quiet courage. And when she stepped outside, the world felt new. Not perfect, just beautifully imperfect. The kind of imperfect that still dared to love. The air that morning tasted different, crisp, alive, almost like the beginning of something new. Isabel walked down the narrow street, her coat brushing softly against her legs, the world glowing with a kind of light that only comes after a long storm. Every step she took felt like a whisper to herself: "You made it, you're still here, you're still breathing." She stopped by a small cafe on the corner, the same one she used to visit years ago with him. For months she had avoided it, too many ghosts lived in the scent of its coffee and the soft music that played inside. But today, she didn't turn away. She pushed the door open, and the bell above it chimed softly. The barista, a kind-faced man with tired eyes, looked up and smiled. "Good morning. Long time no see." Isabel smiled faintly. "Yes, it's been a while." She ordered her coffee and sat by the window, her fingers curled around the warm cup. Outside, the city moved as if it didn't know her pain, people laughing, children running, buses passing by. And for the first time, she didn't resent them for it. She simply watched, quietly grateful to be part of a world that kept turning, no matter how many times her heart had stopped. As she reached into her bag to take out her journal, her hand brushed against something unfamiliar, a small folded envelope. She frowned, pulling it out. The paper was slightly yellowed, the edges soft from time. Her name was written on the front, in handwriting she hadn't seen in years. His handwriting. Her breath caught. For a moment, the cafe disappeared, the noise, the people, everything blurred into stillness. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The scent of old paper hit her first, then the words, written in ink that had faded but still carried the weight of his voice. My dearest Isabel. If you're reading this, it means life has carried you further than we ever imagined. I know you'll try to hide your pain, you'll try to bury it under your strength. But promise me one thing, when the world feels too heavy, don't close yourself off. Don't turn love into a memory you fear. Let it live, through people, through moments, through the little things that still make you smile. If I could say one last thing, it would be this: you were never just meant to be my wife. You were meant to be someone who shows others how to live again. And when that day comes, when you can smile without guilt, know that somewhere, I'm smiling too. With love, always. James. Her eyes blurred instantly. The letter slipped from her fingers, landing softly on the table as her tears fell. The sound of the city faded, only his words remained, echoing inside her like a quiet heartbeat. She pressed her hand against her mouth, trying to breathe through the flood of memories, his laugh, his touch, his promise. For a long time, she just sat there, letting the silence hold her. And then slowly something inside her shifted, not pain this time but peace. A warmth spread through her chest, gentle and forgiving. She looked out the window again, and the world looked different, not because it had changed, but because she finally had. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back in her bag. As she stepped outside, the wind caught her hair, brushing it across her face. She closed her eyes and smiled, whispering, I'm living, James. I'm really living. Days turned into weeks, and life began to bloom again, quietly, steadily. Isabel started volunteering at a local thrift shop, helping others find small treasures from forgotten lives. One afternoon, as she organized a rack of clothes, she felt someone tap her shoulder. She turned to see Eleanor, standing there with a bright smile. You didn't tell me you worked here, she said. Isabel laughed softly. I only started last week. I wanted to do something that felt meaningful. Eleanor nodded. Well, you're doing it. You're helping people find stories again. They shared a smile, the kind that only people who have walked through fire can share. Later, as they talked over tea, Eleanor told her she had met someone new. He's kind, she said shyly. Nothing like before. It's slow, but it feels right. Isabel's eyes softened. That's how it should feel, she said. Like breathing again. And as they laughed together, Margaret joined them, her steps slow but full of grace. You girls remind me of something, she said, settling beside them. You remind me that even after everything, love still finds a way. That night, Isabel returned home and opened her journal once more. She wrote without hesitation, words pouring from a place that finally felt whole. Some stories don't end when love ends. Some continue in new hearts, in new forms, in new chances to be kind. I thought my wedding dress was the last chapter of my life, but maybe it was only the beginning of someone else's. And maybe that's what love truly means, to let your story become part of another's healing. She set her pen down and looked out at the stars blinking beyond her window. The city was quiet again, but she didn't feel alone anymore. Somewhere out there, she imagined James smiling, not from a place of sorrow, but from the peace of knowing she had finally kept her promise. Weeks later, she received a small parcel in the mail. Inside it was a photograph, Eleanor, standing under a tree, wearing the same dress, her hand held by a man whose smile was soft and kind. Behind them, Margaret stood, beaming. At the bottom of the photo, a note was written, For you, because hope is meant to be shared. Isabel held the photo against her chest, eyes wet but lips curved in a tender smile. She whispered, It lived on. She placed the photograph beside James's letter on her desk, both framed now, side by side, like two chapters of the same story. And as she turned off the light that night, she didn't cry. She didn't ache. She simply breathed, deeply, freely, beautifully. The moonlight poured through her window, painting her walls in silver. Somewhere beyond that light, she could almost hear a familiar voice, not calling her back, but cheering her forward. And for the first time, Isabel didn't just survive the night. She belonged to it.